We were bored in Nashville and didn't want to hit a bar or spend a lot of money, so we ventured out and we discovered Fort Negley. Hey folks, welcome to the Down the Road Travel Channel. My name is Will Van Winkle. We got a little bored and we didn't want to spend a ton of money with a vacation coming up. And having just spent a week off to go out of town for a very good friend's funeral, funds were a little tight. So we began looking for something cheap to do and stumbled upon Fort Negley. While much of the history is sad, there are some interesting things that happen at Fort Negley, particularly with civil rights in mind. I was surprised at how little I knew about this fort and the historical significance. Located just outside of downtown Nashville near the Adventure Science Center, which actually leases its land from the fort, we arrived just before 2 p.m. and lo and behold, there was a free guided tour getting ready to head out around the fort. So we jumped in on it. And to be honest, there were only 2 other people on there. So there were 4 people on this one guided tour. Very intimate, very easy to hear the tour guide, even though the wind was blowing like crazy and almost knocked us over a few times. He had a little stand with pictures and some information maps and things like that. And that got blown over multiple times while we were on this tour. It was very, very windy up there. And he said it was usually pretty windy up on top of that hill. It's a pretty high hill. The fort itself is in need of more restoration due to a lengthy history, which I will get into a little bit later in the video, but it's not the history I expected. For example, you'd expect this to be a Confederate fort being in the middle of Tennessee. It was built by the Union. If you're like me and you're looking at the year it was built and you're thinking, well, how did this happen? Building of the fort began in 1862 when Confederate forces were pushed out of Nashville, and their generals decided any further attempts at defending Nashville would be pointless, so they abandoned the city that was immediately occupied by Union forces, who began construction on the fort in August by Captain James St. Clair Morton. Construction was completed by December of the same year, and the fort was named after the then Union Army commander James S. Negley. Now, this was the largest inland stone fort built during the Civil War. The fort was built largely by black labor. 3,200 were still enslaved, and about 700 of which were freed slaves. Now, at this point, the Civil War wasn't much about slavery, so the enslaved people used by the Union were rented from the locals to build the fort. Not getting enough labor, though, they posted notices throughout the Union that emancipated and freed slaves would be offered wages to build the fort, and that brought 8,000 former slaves to the Nashville area. This more than tripled the population, or the black population, rather. Of course, coming for the promise of a paid wage. Now, this is the government we're talking about. So, go figure, most were not paid. In fact, an estimated 310 received their promised payment. And needing still more laborers, Union forces took free black men and women from churches at gunpoint on Sunday and put them to work still wearing their Sunday clothes the following morning. 2,700 of the free laborers and forced laborers lived in camps around the base of St. Cloud Hill, where Negley is situated, and an estimated 600 to 800 men and women died building this fort. Being lied to, forced into service, abused, and provided poor living conditions, which led to disease and death, you'd think the laborers would have had a general hatred towards the Union Army and the fort in general. But workers took great pride in what they had built, and with the speed they had built it, rightfully so. I mean, with modern machinery, we can't get potholes on I-65 repaired in less than 4 months these days. So when plans to attack the fort came to light in November of 1862, they asked for guns to help defend themselves and their work. Of course, this request was denied by Union soldiers who were afraid that the guns would be turned on them due to the harsh treatment of the workers. So the workers took up building tools such as shovels, pickaxes, and things like that in defense. This, along with the Emancipation Proclamation, is actually what paved the way for black troops to actively take part in the fighting of the Civil War. This resulted in about 10% of the Union Army being black soldiers, many of whom were laborers from the fort, establishing the 12th and 13th Colored Troops. The most black soldiers actually came from Tennessee. Now, obviously, what I'm saying here is very, very condensed, and the tour guide goes into a little bit more detail, but I don't want to tell everything because I do think folks should really take this tour for themselves, especially if you are local. There's a lot of good information that I know I was never taught in school, and this came out on the tour. So I'll say allowing the black troops into service is what probably won the war for the North. Another bit of information that I never knew that makes Negley culturally relevant to this day is that the flag that was flown over Nashville was hidden in a quilt of William Driver, a Unionist born in Massachusetts. He remained a Unionist even when his sons enlisted in the Confederate Army. The flag became his prized possession, and it was the first flag that was referred to as Old Glory. That was his name for it, and we have adopted that, and we still use that term today. This was a present to Driver, and it had been around the world with him on more than one occasion because he was he worked on merchant ships. And it is now a permanent exhibit in the Smithsonian, and it was his flag that flew over Nashville to indicate that Nashville was no longer under Confederate control. Now we're getting into some problems here. During Reconstruction, the KKK often used Fort Negley to hold meetings. In the 30s, the WPA began a major reconstruction project, which finished when the U.S. entered World War II. Now, for some reason, there was very little interest in reopening the fort as a historic center. Part of the area was leased out to Herschel Greer Stadium for a minor league baseball team, and the Children's Museum, which is now the Adventure Center. Because the fort was so overgrown, many people who went to the baseball games or the museum had no idea that it was even there. Now, finally, in the early 2000s, another restoration project began. This focused on keeping the fort from experiencing further decay rather than restoring it to its former specs. The fort reopened in 2004, and in 2007, an additional $1 million was procured to build the visitor center, and more work was planned for the future, including building an educational center where the stadium once stood. So plans were canceled, though, when burial sites of the forced laborers were found in 2018. Again, long history, some civil rights abuse. This fort seems to be what kind of turned the tide of the Civil War, and that's due largely to the black population that took pride in their work and wanted to defend their work and themselves and their families as well. Although lots of problems were encountered restoring the fort to this point, to the point that it's currently at, from the human rights issues to racism, etc., Negley is now listed as a site of memory in the UN's slave route project. A lot of sad things happened here, but at least from the impression that I got on our guided tour, it also seems to be a place where the black spirit was proven, and I strongly encourage you to go check this place out and learn more of what I left out due to time considerations. Let me know your takeaway in the comments below. Let me know if you knew this information, if you learned this information in school. Like I said, I went to school in Texas. None of this information was there, but it all kind of came out while we were at the fort. I will say what it is mainly used for right now is a walking trail. There's a walking trail that goes around the fort. If you go around that trail so many times, it's a mile. But so many people are walking that trail and they have no idea what happened on those grounds. And I do think it would be very beneficial for everybody to go in there and experience the tour and listen to the history behind it. And I encourage everybody watching this to do the same thing. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, share the video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you down the road.
Let's hit the road.